what we're gonna, this is not necessarily a definitive talk, because this is a subject which we continue to work on and continue to research. But what we've discovered, and this came up doing scraping paint off of a V&T passenger car, there were layers that I expected to find that I didn't. And it started me thinking, it started me thinking, and then Andrew chimed in, and together we've discovered that yellow and green, as we know it, is not very common. And so this is the cult of the yellow and green, or the death of the cult of the yellow and green. So this is what we think of the V&T. We've got lovely models of cars that probably never ran on the V&T in plastic, in yellow and green. We have paintings of passenger trains crossing Highway 50 on modern bridges in what's purported to be Baldwin Style 1, pulling passenger cars in yellow and green. We have Howard Fogg paintings of black engines pulling yellow and green passenger cars. We have yellow and green diesels.
Two of them.
Well, yes.
But those are prototypes.
Yes, now they are the prototype for that particular, yeah. So a few years ago I was involved with a project on Car 17. This is the former Central Pacific car that went to Promontory. It was the Bonanza, the private car, and it was turned into a coach and survives. There it is at the Nevada State Railroad Museum. There's its last use on the V&T. It's one of the 1938 excursions. We can look there and we can see that it's light colored with a darker letterboard. Little better vision. It's in the shadow, but it's a darker letterboard in that picture. And here's some of my, this is my reverse graffiti. I think Andrew did one of these too. It's a doorpost. It's a panel that would be equivalent to the letterboard on the end of the car. It's a sheltered location. It actually has some striping on it. Piece of the ceiling. And what's not there is chrome green. And that was kind of surprising. So I started questioning it. And everybody knows that the V&T was painting everything yellow and green from the turn of the century. And there wasn't green. There were earlier colors. There was a bit of the maroon that it carried in not much, but from 1877. There was definitely yellow on the car, but the green was olive, and it was very dark. Okay. Another close-up of that same sample. And then I started looking at other cars, and Andrew and I were up a few weeks ago, and Wendell let us do our reverse graffiti on 21, and we started looking at pictures, and we found things. So 21, these are pictures from the last month. 21 at the museum today, and what's missing, 21 has green metal along the lower edge to protect it.
Yeah.
Yeah, everybody knows that's how you're supposed to paint your model. No. We started questioning things, even artifacts that we were finding. We had one of the pieces of metal off, and Andrew was sanding holes in the paint at the back of it. We had Mike Cullen's research. If you find a spot where somebody sanded on a car, if I didn't do it, Mike did. And we had all of his notes, okay? So we started to question that, and that's the whole, this is our research project, and it is ongoing. These aren't necessarily conclusions. This is V&T 21, corner guard, and in fact, this was the one that told us that we needed to go look for pictures because we were finding chrome green, but we were finding chrome green applied after the car entered preservation.
That chrome green is a preservative.
Okay, well, very good. If you look on the backside of number 13 in Virginia City, you might find an example of reverse graffiti. We were looking for the cars that would potentially contain this information. So more than almost any other museum, CSRM does it, but these reports for cars, before they're restored, or even when they're thinking about restoring a car, we get restoration reports or studies. And so we were looking at all of the available reports, and we were taking the information, and instead of just taking it for car 14, for example, we laid them all out along with all the information we could find and tried to correlate them to see if we could make things line up. This is a sample from 14 from the ceiling that Mike had done. We started looking at pictures. We started looking at photographs, and this is a really good example. This is purported to be a red car. There's this period that, yeah, you don't think so either, huh? Because this is 1930s, and there's this, here's another one of the shot with the same thing, and there it is, and when you adjust the contrast, it isn't. So we were looking for the mistakes, the assumptions, the things that didn't work out. Except maybe there were red cars. Yeah, twice. So we were trying to find that information. We'll get to this photograph in a minute. There's some really interesting thoughts on this photograph. So now that we have completely destroyed knowledge of what you know, now it's time to kind of come back and see if we can figure out what's really going on in the world.
Heresy.
Others have tried to burn me at the stake.
Burn the witch! Who invited him?
So we started to go back just into paint information. V&T had a couple master car painters. D.L. Culp, 76 to 80, died young. Joseph Castle was already working in the shop, would go until April of 1936 when he died. And with his death, at that period in the V&T, they were shutting the shops down. And so with his death, they essentially didn't replace him, and they looked for alternative ways to deal with cars. Paint shop, standalone building next to the turntable, a couple pictures of it. Description of it, it's 25 by 125 feet long. You want to get the paint shop away from the other buildings because you don't want the dust from the sawdust from car work and the other materials around. But they're discussing it. This is from the Territorial Enterprise in 1880. They are telling us that they like wine color. Location, this is out of Farrell's book. It's up there, not next to the turntable, a little distance away. Track arrangement to it varied over the years, but it was a through track. Picture of the inside, although this is in 37 after the shop is closed. This is one of the engineers lettering. Yeah, either it's 13 or 14. 13. Yeah. So we visited libraries. We went to Bancroft. We went to UNR. Well, we asked Stephen lots of questions. Some things were handed over. So we tried to find out what the record said, the V&T record. And W.H. Kirk, the engineer, wrote down his paint formulas. He was very much into documenting everything. And we have the 3 official paint formulas. There was also a formula for red lead. That was a primer. But if you look at them, there's a primer on top, there was a hard body coat and a finishing coat, and they're all white. So when you look at your black and white photograph and you see a white car, you're probably, no. Color didn't matter. The paint, the oil, the turpentine, the dryer that was in it mattered. So you do this and then you add color. And that's kind of giving you a hint maybe of how they were thinking about paint at times. It was a protectant. It really wasn't, about color, which makes it kind of hard. He doesn't say what color they were doing or what they were going to mix. So what we're looking for was individual car records, time books, we found material charge books and paint inventories that were starting to give us some information. So this one is one of Stevens. He has these from about 97 to 1926, and they're going to record a history of what has been done to the car, not color. They're painting, they're varnishing, they're painting, they're varnishing. And what you see is that in 1897, in 98, in 99, in 1900, this happens to be 17, something's happening to it annually because this car goes into the shop annually to be maintained. After that book expires in 26, they go to this one that's held by UNR. And they have a series of pages, and this is 17 after that, after 1926, and after it going into the shop annually, we now see 1927, 1928, 1932, and 1937. The maintenance is falling off. So we can get this information, and by the way, the columns are labor and materials charged to the car. So when you see a bunch of materials, it's a paint job, and when you see very little materials, they may just be washing it. And they would charge something as simple as the soda used to make the soap to wash the car. We have time books. These are Bancroft. Series of them, and the top half of this book, this happens to be 1911, the top half of this book are 2 months, that's the double line. It happens to be April and May of 11, and that's the people working in the shop so that they can pay them. But down below throughout these time books, not necessarily on the same page, sometimes in reverse chronological order to the rest of the book, they're keeping track of what they've worked on and how long they've worked on it, how much time was spent. And so in this one, we've got Coach 17 down at the bottom in April, and we have got a ton of time on this car. And you'll get the name of the man who's working on it. You can see it under baggage car 21, which is also being done in April. But you're seeing the hours recorded. And by going through, you can, in the absence of the car records, you can reconstruct when things were in the shop and how long it was. There's material charge books. Like any good inventory, they're going to charge each car for the paint consumed. So about 2/3 of the way down on the left-hand side, there's car 17. The materials that they used in April for that time that they recorded. And we see that they got paint and varnish for $16 and glass, because glass was also a function of the paint shop. For $1, they had to replace a window. And so they spent $17 on that round on this car. A few times the charge books get more detailed, rarely. So this happens to be for 4 in 90. And they're actually telling us they're using varnish, they're using paint, umber black, chrome green, paint, lye, they're washing it, 3 lights of glass, and 2 papers of bronze for lettering. We can start to get some idea of what they're doing and what they're consuming. But paint, in this case, is white. The black, the chrome green, the umber are how they're going to color that paint.
That's all pigment.
That's
dry
pigment, yeah. Not necessarily dry. Some of it's in tubes. Some of it's ground in oil. And so on the inventories, they'll carry all that information. So here's one of the inventories. This one is from Bancroft. There's also some inventories at UNR. And this particular inventory is 3 pages long. Okay, but there's some fun things here. This is 1922, and we find out that they're carrying, you look at the amounts and they've got 3 pounds or 4 pounds. There's 145 pounds of car yellow.
That's probably yellow.
It's a blend. There's 25 pounds of olive green. And we do have other yellows and umbers up above. So this is from a period when we're getting olive green trim on a yellow car. Okay, we can take this and compare it to contemporary paint catalogs to get some idea, although unfortunately they're mixing, so we're only seeing the pigment colors, not what it looks like after it's mixed with white lead, to give it a color. But we got some ideas on that. After 1937, these guys are going to now contract out. So for example, this is number 18, it's 1942, and we're calling in George Lind, and he's going to paint the car. Another one here, this is the check, you have to pay the guy. Similar one, this is just washing the mail coach, they don't even give us the number. So this is what's gonna happen later in time, the record keeping is much less. We're not gonna see the same information. So, some things that have been covered before, they have a winter and a summer train through much of the time. Sometimes it's called the Philadelphia and San Francisco train. Later on, the cars get mixed around to become the winter and summer train. There are extra cars, picnic cars, which the Brills become picnic cars eventually, and they don't get the same level of maintenance. The cabooses are painted in a different set, although they're treated as like passenger cars, they're painted in different schemes. They're painted less often. Over time, maintenance decreases. So the two mainline train sets originally, the picnic cars, the Brills, Minden trains, so they separate the Minden connection. Those cars are treated a little differently, cabooses and the later cars. We started looking at striping. So we've got a arabesque, we've got a simple box and with that'll go on the end of the letterboard. You've got things, this is the Brills, very ornate arabesque. Notice they're on red paint. We might talk about that. We kind of hinted there might be some discussion of red paint. But you can see the earlier greens right in here. So you can't trust that all paint layers are there. Cars are recited, and there are references in some of the paint records that they burned off the corner posts when the paint gets too thick. But there are certain places they don't seem to as often, and the top of the door, the end door post seems to be a wonderful place to find evidence. So we've seen this one before, frequently attributed to the Corbin fight. Wilkie will tell you that he strongly believes it's 1902 based upon the women's fashions, and can argue that very, very forcefully. Yeah. Get there. Oh, anyway.
So I had never heard that one attributed to the Corbin fight.
Okay, I found that, so we've got this, but the interesting thing is,
No relation to me.
we've got,
It said it was the Corbin.
there up on the letterboard is that box striping pattern. The car is generally one color.
Is that a star in there or a blemish?
I think it's a blemish. The corner posts from the same photograph, so we've got these geometric designs we find. Notice this one, this is 38, there isn't a boxing, so, or 35. We're not having a boxing on that, so they're gonna drop that over time. The two Brills are fun. Because if we look at the letterboard in this, the one car does not have the boxing, the second does. And this is something that shows up in those 1938 fan trip trains. And the one car had been repainted in 26 and the other was repainted in 28. And in that period, we got a time to drop the boxing. This is Mike Collins from year 2000. Trying to explain the early colors, and we get this mad mix of colors. We kind of right in here, this is these three, we go to wine or lake, sometimes with yellow trucks, dark crimson sometimes, and this is when 17 is converted from a business car to a coach. And we start to see, after this wide mix, we suddenly start to hang on to a color for a while. So, what do we kind of think the rules are? Early years, 77 to about 83, we're gonna be in wine. 1883 to 1916, in general, it's yellow with brown corner posts and letterboards, but in the middle, there's some cars red in 97 to 03-ish. We'll look at that in a minute. 1916 to 39, it looks like we're in the dark olive instead of brown on a yellow car. And sometime after 1938, they go to chrome green. So what you're getting in chrome green is not the passenger trains we love, it's the leftover equipment. It's the stuff that didn't get sent to Hollywood. It's the dying part of the railroad. So Mike Collins' illustration of the wine with the yellow trucks and color card, where we're trying to attribute what those colors are. Fun thing about the wine period, the Carson and Colorado cars are painted to match. So we have a much bigger fleet at that period. It's the one time they kind of hit on a standard. Okay, the first yellow and brown, this is roughly 1890, crossing Crown Point Trestle. Close-up of that, you can get an idea of what they're looking like. We've got the red, so we've got the Brill, we see this red. We think this is the later red. These are examples of it. We've got some on car 14. It's a much brighter red. It's not the wine. It's a brighter red. But we're seeing it on more than one car, which is kind of nice. Kind of the standard paint in the 1920s, we're into that. This is one of Andrew's illustrations. We're into this kind of really nice color, but that green, when you match it with a match system, comes out almost black. It's a very, very dark color. It's not bright green, it is a dark green. The boxing gets lost after about 1927-ish. So we sometimes, you're gonna see in a minute some colors, and we'll identify them with numbers, and there's a couple different systems to use. So one of the problems that we have is that Heather keeps calling me, and Heather says, what color should I use? Okay, what color should I use for this? And that's a problem. We find it in lots of different industries have this problem, and there's a couple well-known matching systems. Pantone matching system, or PMS, created for printer's ink, based on pigments and the way they mix pigments, is relatively available. You can get older fans. You're only supposed to keep them a year. Nobody does. Well, actually, a few people do, and then they sell them on eBay. So they're not real expensive. It's a system that's been expanded over time, and they recently are now doing paint as well. So they're one that people like because it's relatively well known across a large population. Munsell, Nevada State Railroad Museum owns a Munsell paint book. They're very expensive, thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Munsell is nice. That's graphically describing Munsell. Munsell does it in a number that, in theory, if you really understand, you can actually predict what it is just off the number, where the Pantone is just an assigned number. So Munsell is nice, but it is almost no use to most of us. It's used in architecture a lot because we don't have access to the information. You can make custom match cards, that works, or we can use model paints, or even just go down to Home Depot and just get all those little cards, go up and hold it up. You know, model paints are transitory. I'll tell you what, next year we'll give you all the matches in Flocal. And then those of you not aware, Flocal has discontinued all of its paints. So you come up with these mixes, they'll change formulas. So we have a problem. Recently though, it's becoming more possible to print PMS numbers on certain printers, which is what Andrew's really good at, by the way. That and going to the room. So paint card. Okay, we have these for you. So we've come up with matches for 3 periods. they're not perfect, but what we found, for example, when Mike has done matches, and some of your stuff is on the Yahoo group in the files.
Yeah.
Some of the restoration feasibility studies have Pantone numbers. We kept finding the same numbers showing up. It was really interesting across. So we were trying to take those, and so in 1910, we've got a corner post brown and a siding yellow.
Hold up your mic.
We've got a corner post brown and a siding yellow. We got it for 24, and we got it for 38, which is the chrome green. And these seem to be the colors. These are pretty good matches for everybody. Andrew was having lots of fun setting a printer for this, by the way. It was really interesting to watch, and there was a lot of paper destroyed. So that's kind of our work. We're going to keep doing it. The sources, the Nevada State Railroad Museum restoration studies, mostly done by Mr. Drew, are the first place to go and look. They're not always give you a Pantone number, but they're going to tell you what they found and explain it. V&T records. We're really lucky to have an incredible amount of written records for this railroad. So Bancroft, University of Nevada, paint sampling on surviving equipment. So we've been able to sample off of a number of cars, or look at Mike's samples from previous days and sit there with magnifying glasses and match them. And we both look at them, and then Andrew holds his phone up with a phone app, and then we don't agree. Stephen, thank you for the stuff you've given us. Stephen's wonderful this way. Mike Collins, same thing. He's been doing this stuff for a long time. And when we pull all of this together, it starts to mean things. Newspaper reports, and I'm really hopeful that if we're all going to read the Territorial Enterprise, we're going to start to find someplace an announcement about the new colors. So let's all do it. So that's where maybe next year we'll do the grills. That was, Andrew was working on this at the table yesterday. This was created, and it turned out he didn't have a mouse, so he only got that far on the car. So that's all you get.
I actually have finished the Brill illustration, but when I loaded up the artwork to come here, I brought the wrong version that wasn't finished. And I said, I'm not going to finish this here, so you get a part. I'm sorry.
You lost it on the way back from the moon?
Yes, yes. It was an unfortunate EMP accident.
So use the cards as indicative. If you mix the yellows across them, it probably wouldn't matter. But it gives a new standard for what we could try to use, and we're happy to answer questions.
Randy, have you ever tried to investigate the rate of darkening of the different varnishes they use? Because all this goes away with varnish and sunlight.
So these are, until really late, this is all linseed oil paint. And after you sand a sample hole, it only takes about 10 or 15 minutes for them to lighten up with modern light. And when you do these samples, you're cutting across surface,
Yes.
and you actually can go through and look at a magnifying glass and see varnish layer, paint layer, dirt layer. I actually don't believe that paint fades.
No, the paint doesn't, but the varnish changes color.
Varnish changes color, and the pigment, the matrix that holds the pigment together will chalk, and it will look lighter. But the paint itself, the pigment doesn't generally change colors on most of these paints. And so you're able to, when you get it exposed, look at the layer, and you do have to decide where in a layer you're trying to match it to, but yes.
Because some of the paints that are just removing varnish or revarnishing over old varnish. And that makes all of this very difficult as to how the car would look when it rolled out into the sunlight.
Well, and I will tell you on a personal experiment, I varnished a car. And it's really interesting, the varnish changes the reflectivity. And if you look at the car at a very, let's say, you look at it head on, you see all the lettering. If you get off and look at it at 45 degrees, the lettering disappears with varnish. And the reflections change. So you do, when you're cutting through the layers, the multiple layers, you don't have to look at the varnish.
Varnish gives it a darker.
Yeah.
are, in fact, and by the way, you can lick your finger and rub it on the car, and you'll see what it would look like with fresh varnish. Okay, that's basically the same effect.
So you leave your DNA everywhere too.
Yeah. I can't, by the way, lead paint is sweet. Just if you'd like to know, I can taste lead.
So after you found out why the first carpet didn't do it too long.
You know, one of the things is, those guys knew that lead was dangerous. So, any other questions? Yes?
I got a question. You said,
Okay, looking on the back of the Lightning Express, it seems to me that there could be a year in the mid-1870s that 1 through 4 would be fawn color and 11 through 14 are the green color. Is that correct?
Yes. Two different trains. So up until 1870, we see wine appear in the newspapers in 76. You get the rebuilding in 77 of the business cars, Coach 17. 78? Okay. 78, okay. So then it's, okay. That's when we see red, the wine, it's, the same color is alternately called claret,
Yeah.
wine, sometimes a maroon, or lake. And so they're all the same color in general. It's different people's terms for it. With that color coming in, we get away from the annual repaint and the summer and the winter trains being different colors. So we've left, in fact, we've ignored that period in this talk for the most part, except for including Mike's matrix on it. At that point, they're going to a more or less fleet standard of wine, red, claret. They'll go to yellow with a brown corner post, pretty much on everything, not on necessarily, cabooses get treated differently. Then they go into a red again, but I'm not sure if it's everything. Then back to yellow and brown, and then yellow and olive, and then yellow and green. So,
But if I was modeling 1875,
yeah.
it looks like those two different trains.
Mhm.
painted
Because
two
literally, you see the swap of the trains through much of the V&T's history. One train goes into the shop during the winter and is repainted and cleaned up. And when it comes out in the spring, the other train goes into the shop and they have 6 months to clean it up.
I'm just gonna, well, we ran the restoration on a UV caboose that had plywood up for, on one side for covering the siding for about 10, 15 years. Other side was left exposed when we popped the plywood. We had two different shades, but it was all UP yellow. The sun side was much lighter than the
But
cover
if
side.
one of the things that's interesting is if you were to wash that or varnish over it, they look the same. Because what you're seeing as a change of color is actually the matrix that holds the yellow failing. Yes?
Yeah, when the cars are red, you know what color the pinstriping and the letters were?
Which of the reds?
The pretty one.
Anyway, yeah, I mean, the business car 17.
It's gold leaf.
Gold leaf?
Yeah.
And the letters?
On the
were
letter.
black.
Right, yes. Yeah. Well, that's actually pre-17 report.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so, and that's one of the things, is they do change the subtleties around it, but generally gold leaf. Yeah. A little later on, we see bronze leaf on some of the
Do
repaint.
they block and shade the lettering too?
Well, I mean, this is a 1900, let's get back. Let's see. I mean, now this happens to be the 1900 red,
Okay.
but you can get an idea, this happens to be yellow paint. Okay, in that case, deluxe, okay? But we also have, if we go back, these are drop shaded letters, okay? We know that, by the way, the number on the side of the car was red, because that's been recorded, it's been found. On this one, it's sometimes.
In the 30s, they
Yeah.
used all of it.
And then, yeah. So here, on this one, it would have been gold leaf for the lettering, but probably with black drop shadow.
The striping on the trucks is red too. by
Yeah,
the way.
yes,
It's weird.
yeah. Yes.
Since the McKean car is a passenger vehicle, do you have any color on that?
Well, the McKean's got its own restoration report, very carefully documented, and it comes new in a dark maroon, and it later becomes a much brighter red. And then among the oddball cars, the short baggage, originally 21, later 24? 20 and first 21, and then that car ends up in red for a while, and it may have well been painted to match the McKean. So it's one of the oddball things that you do look for odd cars, and like I say, cabooses are on their own system.
In fact, the short car had a special air system attached so it could work with the McKean.
Yeah, so the McKean was treated differently. And it's, you know, the McKean was, for much of its life, Minden train, and somehow the Minden trains get treated a little differently in terms of maintenance and stuff in the records. They're not on the same cycle. Okay. Well, oh, yes.
You correlated the demise of annual, semi-annual painting with the death of the last.
No, actually, the semi-annual painting seems to die about 26. On when you look at the paint books, and it's really interesting. Let me get back here. I'll show you, because I chose intentionally 17 for several things, because we had all of the documents on it, and it's really interesting how they all connect together. But okay, so here is 17's 3 pages put together of 17's record from 90 to 1926. And literally, if you're, this side's probably easier to read, 26, 25, 24, 23, 22, 21. And if we go down through those, so in 20 it's repainted, next year it's revarnished, revarnished, repainted in 23, varnished, varnished, varnished. Oops. Okay, here's its record after 1926. Between 1926 and 1938, when it left, or 37, when this record ends, which is also when it left roughly when it left the railroad. In 27, we've got some labor to clean it, and we've got some paint here. In 32 it gets cleaned. In 37 it gets cleaned. It's not even getting charged for the washing supplies anymore.
My question goes to what is going on outside of the paint shop that's affecting what's happening in the paint shop.
I think that they're just
Is
cutting.
26 and 27 about the time they start doing the mixed trains.
I think it's the Depression. Somebody said Depression over here. I think it's the economic times.
They kept closing the shops down too.
Yeah, they kept closing. I mean, this is basically at the point that they're just, things are slowing down. And of course, in this car's case, you've got the newer, bigger cars that are probably taking its place on the road. So it's now probably almost a picnic car.
If you go through the letterpress books, you'll find that they've closed the shops, laid everybody off, and then all of a sudden they gotta do something, so they hire somebody back, open the shops. Then they close the shops again. It just went on that way until the end, basically.
So yeah, they're just, by the end of the 20s, they're in dying mode.
You know, they're losing money every year.
Any other questions?
I'm not surprised, though, that some of those color schemes didn't last very long. I remember one newspaper article where, I think it was when the car came out in kind of a bright red with yellow wheels. The newspaper was very derogatory about it.
That was actually the first standard. That was the wine with the yellow trucks.
I think
And that one held for 5 years.
Mr. Yarrington was very sensitive to public criticism.
But, you know, that was then, he then applied that paint to the Carson, Colorado cars. So that one, although, yes, the newspaper report is very critical of that look, but that paint style stuck. Well, thank you.
And now more about wildflowers. Remember that you